The clock on the wall ticked once more into the heavy dark of the dispatch center. Elena Vargas sat alone beneath the low hum of fluorescent lights. Her headset rested on the desk like a coiled snake waiting to strike. Then the line lit up red. She slipped the headset on and drew a slow breath. A voice spilled through the speaker before she could speak. It was ragged. A man's voice cracked and rose and fell again. Someone's taken her. Please. She's gone. Elena's fingers tightened around the edge of the console. She kept her own voice level. Sir, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. The line crackled with the sound of wind or breath or both. The caller swallowed hard. I heard the door. I heard her scream. Then nothing. Just the wind outside the window. Elena's screen filled with the address he stammered out. A small house on the edge of the county line. She typed fast but spoke slower still. Units are on the way. Stay on the line with me. The man began to weep. Not loudly, just a soft, broken sound that filled the quiet room around her. Elena closed her eyes for half a second and listened to the silence between his words. She pictured the empty road outside that house, the single porch light swinging in the dark. Tell me her name, she said. The caller's answer came like a prayer. Leela. Her name is Leela. Her name is Leela. Elena logged it. The name sat on the screen like a stone dropped into still water. She could already feel the weight of it spreading outward. Other lines would ring soon. Other voices would demand answers. The caller kept talking. Fragments of the night spilled from him. A slammed door. Footsteps that weren't hers. The sudden absence of her voice where it had always been. Elena let him speak. She did not interrupt the spaces between his sentences. Those spaces mattered more than the words. A cruiser radioed in. The unit was 2 minutes out. Elena relayed the information in short, measured phrases. Possible abduction. Victim is Leela. Caller is the husband. The officer's reply was crisp. She heard the engine accelerate through the static. The man on the phone had gone quiet. Elena waited. She counted the beats of her own heart. 1, 2. Then he spoke again, softer now. I think I saw headlights just before the scream. She marked the detail. Headlights, time, direction. Outside the dispatch window, the city slept. Inside, the red light on the console pulsed like a living thing. Elena kept the caller on the line. She asked nothing more for a moment. She simply let the silence stretch between them. In that stretch, the investigation began to breathe. It took shape in the quiet. It waited for the officers to arrive at the dark house. The first cruiser turned onto the gravel drive. Elena heard the tires through the phone. The caller's voice changed. It grew smaller. They're here. She nodded, though he could not see her. Stay where you are. Let them come to you. She watched the screen as the unit marked arrival. Another unit followed 2 blocks behind. The night had opened its first door. Elena sat very still. The headset felt heavier now. She kept listening. The investigation had begun. It would not stop until every silence had been filled. The investigation had begun. It would not stop until every silence had been filled. Elena leaned closer to the radio feed. Snow crunched under tires as the first unit rolled to a stop at the edge of the field. The rural road lay buried under a fresh crust of frost. No lights burned in the distant farmhouse. Only the wind moved. Detective Hale stepped out first. His boots left deep prints that the frost tried to claim back at once. He scanned the white expanse. The air held its breath. Another car followed 2 lengths behind. Its headlights carved twin tunnels through the dark. Officer Ramirez joined him without a word. Their flashlights swept low across the ground. There, a line of footprints broke the perfect surface. They led away from the road and into the trees. Hale crouched. The prints were fresh. The edges had not yet softened under new snow. He traced one with a gloved finger. The weight behind each step spoke of urgency or fear. Or fear. The silence pressed against their ears like a held note that refused to end. Ramirez marked the first print with a yellow flag. The flag stood out against the white like a warning no one wanted to read. They moved forward together, step by measured step. The second set of prints appeared beside the first, smaller, lighter, running. Elena heard every detail through the headset. She pictured the scene in her mind. Frozen branches, 2 lives written in frost. She kept her breathing shallow so she would miss nothing. The footprints curved toward an old stone wall half buried in drifts. Hale paused at the wall. His light caught a single red thread caught on the stone. It fluttered once and then stilled. Ramirez bagged it without comment. The cold had already numbed their fingers. Still they worked. Beyond the wall, the prints split. One pair continued straight into the woods. The other veered sharply left toward a collapsed shed. Hale chose the shed. His radio crackled once. Elena closed her eyes to listen harder. Inside the shed, the frost had not reached. A single set of tire tracks led out the back. They ended at nothing. Only churned snow remained. Hale knelt again. A shell casing lay half hidden under a board. He lifted it with tweezers. The metal was cold enough to burn through the glove. Ramirez photographed it from 3 angles. Each click of the camera sounded too loud in the still air. Elena gripped the edge of her desk. The clues were small. They were also the only things that spoke. She waited for the next transmission. Hale and Ramirez returned to the main trail. The footprints that had run now overlapped with heavier ones. Someone had followed or pursued. The frost preserved every hesitation. A scuff mark showed where one person had slipped. Another print showed a sudden turn. The story was written plainly if anyone knew how to read it. They reached the tree line. The prints vanished under fresh powder that had fallen only minutes earlier. Hale looked up at the sky. Clouds hid the stars. The night offered no more answers yet. He keyed his radio. "We have a direction." His voice came through low and steady to Elena. She answered without speaking. Her fingers hovered over the map on her screen. The rural grid stretched empty for miles. Only one road led out. She marked it. The investigation had begun to narrow. The weight in her chest grew heavier with each new silence. Hale and Ramirez stood together at the edge of the visible trail. Their breaths rose in white plumes that disappeared at once. The frost waited. The footprints waited. Somewhere ahead, the next clue waited under the same heavy quiet. They took the first step into the trees. The frost crunched beneath their boots as Hale and Ramirez pressed forward. The trees swallowed the light. Each step carried them farther from the open trail and deeper into the hush that pressed against their ears. Hale kept her flashlight low. Ramirez moved at her shoulder. The footprints they followed had grown faint under fresh powder, yet still pointed straight ahead. No voices answered when Hale called out. Only the wind answered. It threaded through the branches like something that had been waiting. Each cabin appeared without warning. One moment the woods stretched unbroken. The next, a low roof broke the line of trunks. Smoke stains marked the chimney. The windows stared black and empty. Hale raised a hand. They stopped. Their breaths rose and vanished. Ramirez tested the front door. It gave with a low groan. Inside, the air smelled of cold ash and something older. Dust coated every surface. Hale swept the beam across the main room. A single chair stood tipped on its side. A coat hung on a peg. Nothing else moved. They cleared the kitchen. The hallway beyond narrowed. 3 doors waited at the end. 2 stood open. The third remained closed. Hale approached it first. She placed her palm against the wood. The surface felt colder than the rest of the house. Ramirez tried the handle, refused to turn. He stepped back. Hale knocked once. The sound died at once. No answer came. She knocked again. Still nothing. They exchanged a look. Ramirez shouldered the door. Wood splintered but held. Hale braced beside him. On the third strike, the frame cracked. The door swung inward and struck the wall. The beam of Hale's light found the bed first. Sheets lay twisted and dark. A shape rested beneath them. She moved closer. The shape did not stir. Ramirez covered the far corner. Hale reached out and drew the sheet back. The face that stared upward had once belonged to the missing girl from the file. Now it belonged only to the silence. Now blood had dried across the pillow. One hand clutched a small recorder. Hale lifted it carefully. She pressed play. Static hissed. Then a whisper rose. It repeated the same phrase 3 times before the tape ended. The words hung in the cold air like something that refused to leave. Ramirez exhaled. Hale's fingers tightened around the recorder. Footsteps sounded outside the cabin. They froze. The steps drew nearer. Hale killed the light. The darkness folded around them again. They waited. The front door creaked. A shadow crossed the threshold. Hale counted the seconds. Ramirez shifted his weight. The shadow paused in the hallway. Then it moved toward the open bedroom. Hale stepped into the doorway. Her light flared. The figure raised an arm against the glare. Was a man in a heavy coat. His eyes widened. He carried nothing in his hands. Hale ordered him to stop. He did not move. Ramirez circled behind. The man's shoulders slumped. He sank to his knees without a word. The recorder lay on the bed between them. Hale picked it up again. She pressed play once more. The whisper returned. This time the man's lips moved with the words. Hale watched him. Ramirez secured his wrists. Outside the wind rose and fell. Inside the cabin the silence reclaimed its weight. They led the man through the main room. Snow had begun to fall again. Snow had begun to fall again. It covered the footprints they had followed. Hale paused at the threshold. She looked back once. The locked door stood open now. The room beyond it offered no further sound. Only the recorder's faint click remained. She closed the cabin door behind them. The three of them stepped into the trees. The weight of the discovery settled between Hale and Ramirez with every step. Neither spoke. The man between them kept his eyes on the ground. The recorder rested in Hale's pocket. Its message waited. The woods waited. Ahead, the trail narrowed once more. They followed it. The cold pressed closer. No other sound rose to meet them. No other sound rose to meet them. The trail gave way at last to the back edge of the street where the houses waited, in a row of drawn curtains and locked doors. Hale stepped onto the pavement first. Ramirez followed with the suspect still between them. The cold from the woods clung to their coats. No one spoke of what they had found. They left the man with the patrol car and turned toward the first house. The recorder stayed in Hale's pocket. Its weight felt heavier now. The street looked empty, yet every window seemed to watch. They knocked. An elderly woman opened the door only a crack. Her eyes darted past them toward the woods. She said she had seen nothing that night. Nothing at all. Her voice trembled on the last word. Hale asked about the lights she kept on after midnight. She shook her head. Ramirez pressed gently. She closed the door without another sound. The next house belonged to a young couple. The man answered with his arms folded tight across his chest. He claimed the street had been quiet for weeks. His wife stood behind him in the hallway. She did not meet their eyes. Hale mentioned the argument neighbors sometimes heard through thin walls. The man's jaw tightened. No one argues here. The door shut before Ramirez could ask more. They moved down the line. Each step echoed on the sidewalk. At the third house, a teenager leaned in the doorway. He shrugged at every question, said he stayed in his room with headphones on. Yet his gaze kept drifting toward the fourth house where an older couple lived. Hale noted the look. Ramirez stayed silent. The older couple invited them inside but offered only tea and tight smiles. The husband spoke first. He had heard nothing unusual. The wife nodded quickly, too quickly. When Hale mentioned the missing person from the woods, the husband's hand tightened around his cup. Porcelain cracked. A single drop of tea fell to the tablecloth. Neither of them offered to explain. Outside again, the air felt thicker. Across to the opposite side of the street, a single man answered the next door. He kept the chain on. His voice came through the narrow gap. He worked nights, slept days, saw no one, and wanted to keep it that way. Ramirez asked if he had noticed anyone watching the woods. The chain rattled as the door closed. Tension settled over the remaining houses like frost. Curtains twitched at their approach. One woman stood on her porch before they even knocked. She said the street had always been private. People minded their own business here. Hale asked about the night the victim disappeared. She looked past them toward the trees. Sometimes the woods take what they want. Then she turned and went inside. The final house on the block belonged to a family with 2 small children. The father blocked the doorway with his body. He insisted everything had been normal. The mother hovered behind him, holding one child close. Her eyes carried the same guarded look Hale had seen in the woods. Ramirez mentioned the quiet that never quite felt peaceful. The father's hands curled into fists at his sides. No one invited them farther. They stood together on the sidewalk when the last door closed. The recorder remained untouched in Hale's pocket. Every neighbor had claimed the same empty truth, yet the air between the houses hummed with things left unsaid. The street had seen everything and spoken of nothing. Ramirez glanced once toward the waiting woods. Hale did not move. The cold pressed closer still. No other sound rose to meet them. Hale turned away from the woods at last. The weight in his pocket felt heavier now. Ramirez shifted beside him without a word. They walked back toward the house in silence. The streetlights flickered once and held. Inside the door waited a plain envelope. No stamp marked its face. Only a single word scrawled across the front. Hale's name. He lifted the paper between two fingers. The handwriting slanted sharp and uneven. Ramirez watched without moving closer. Hale broke the seal. One sheet slid free. One sheet slid free. The words began without greeting. They spoke of the night the body was found. They named the hour. They named the watcher in the trees. Hale read each line twice. His breath came slower with every sentence. Ramirez leaned forward at last. What does it say? Hale held the page toward the light. It says the accused never walked alone that night. It says someone else carried the knife. The room seemed smaller around them. Hale set the letter on the table. His fingers stayed on the edge. Ramirez read the lines in turn. Neither man spoke for a long moment. A second envelope lay beneath the first. Hale drew it out. The same hand, the same slant. This one carried no name on the front. He opened it anyway. More lines filled the page. They spoke of doubt. They spoke of a second set of footprints leading away from the body. They asked why the detectives had not followed those prints into the dark. They's jaw tightened. Ramirez exhaled once. The words pressed against the quiet room. Every claim raised another question. Every denial from the neighbors now felt thinner. Hale folded the first letter. Then the second. He placed both back inside the outer envelope. The paper crinkled under his thumb. Outside the window, the street remained empty. Ramirez spoke first. We checked every house. Hale nodded once. Yet these lines name a watcher none of them saw, or none of them named. The cold from the street still clung to their coats. Hale moved to the window. He drew the curtain back an inch. Nothing stirred on the sidewalk. The woods beyond stayed black. Another sound reached them then, a soft scrape at the front step. Hale turned. Ramirez already stood at the door. No one waited on the other side when it opened. Only a third envelope rested on the mat. Hale picked it up without comment. Hale, the handwriting matched. Inside waited a single sentence. The accused is not the only one who should fear the dark. Ramirez read it over his shoulder. The paper trembled slightly in Hale's grip. He lowered it to the table beside the others. 3 letters now. 3 voices from someone who refused to stand in the light. The house settled around them. Wood creaked once in the wall. Hale stared at the envelopes. Each line had pulled another thread loose from the story they had built. Each thread left new doubt in its place. Ramirez stepped back. We need to trace the paper. Hale did not answer at once. His eyes stayed on the folded sheets. The street outside held its silence. No footsteps approached. The letters lay still under the lamp. Their edges caught the light and held it. Hale reached for his coat again. Ramirez followed without question. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Outside, the air felt sharper. Hale kept the envelopes in his pocket this time. The weight settled against his side. Ramirez glanced toward the woods once more. Hale kept his gaze on the road ahead. No other sound rose between the houses. Only the faint rustle of paper followed their steps. The night waited. The letters waited with it. And the doubts they carried refused to fade. Ramirez shifted the packet against his side once more. The road ahead narrowed under the weight of the night. Hale kept his eyes fixed forward. The letters inside the packet pressed against fabric and skin. Each step carried them closer to the station where the timeline would be tested. The building rose from the darkness like an afterthought. Lights flickered behind half-drawn blinds. Ramirez pushed the door open. The air inside felt thick with unspoken hours. Hale followed without a word. Two witnesses waited at the scarred table. One sat with arms crossed. One sat a finger against the wood in uneven rhythm. Ramirez placed the packet down gently. Hale opened the first folder. The statements lay side by side. Times refused to match. The first witness cleared his throat. He claimed the lights went out at 9. He swore he saw nothing after that. His voice held steady, but his eyes darted toward the window. Ramirez leaned in. The missing hours stretched between them like a wound. The second witness shook his head. She insisted the events began closer to midnight. Her account placed the figures near the woods at that later hour. Details overlapped in places, yet the gap remained. Hale wrote the times down. The pencil scratched louder than it should have. These, Ramirez felt the doubt settle deeper. One account placed the victim alive past 10. The other erased those same minutes entirely. The packet seemed heavier now. He slid the letters out. Paper edges caught the light. Conflicting words stared back from each page. The room grew still. The first witness looked away. The second gripped the table edge. Ramirez asked for the sequence again. Times shifted under pressure. One story gained minutes, the other lost them. The gap widened. Hale stood and paced the length of the room. His footsteps measured the silence. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. Branches scraped the roof like fingers seeking entry. Inside, the conflict sharpened. Every detail carried new weight. The first witness repeated his claim, 9 o'clock and nothing more. When that email got AidBooks skeletons tied at his stellations, proving nothing new when Naharkis told them. One of them buried his globe, hung between their words. The missing hours hung between their words. Ramirez marked each contradiction. Tension thickened in the air. The ready started to raise a nodding seam, each neither story. Hale stopped pacing. He met Ramirez's gaze. Both men recognized the fracture in the evidence. Was the witnesses exchanged glances. Doubt passed between them like a current. Ramirez pressed on the timeline once more. Hours slipped away under questioning. No witness casting witness. The first witness faltered. The second held firm, yet her certainty cracked at the edges. Silence stretched across the table. Ren seemed to pulse with unresolved time. Ramirez gathered the letters slowly. Each fold carried the weight of the gap. Ramirez gathered the letters slowly. He met Ramirez's gaze. Breathe this moment's silence. Ikai seemed to touch the pages. The maid-style got away. Neath one of them approached the station where the timeline would be tested, never the entire clothing. The editors waited to wait their read-saben. Each silhouette was easier than McCallan thought. The missing hours refused to close. Ramirez adjusted the packet once more. Hale turned toward the woods. The doubts traveled with them. Hale led the way into the trees. The path narrowed under their boots. Ramirez followed close. The packet of files pressed against his side like a hidden weight. Moonlight filtered through the branches in thin lines. It caught on the edge of an old cabin ahead. The structure leaned slightly. Its windows stared empty. Hale stopped at the threshold. The air smelled of damp wood and something sharper. Blood. They pushed the door open together. It groaned on rusted hinges. Inside, the floorboards showed dark stains. Ramirez knelt first. He ran a gloved finger along the edge. The mark had dried into the grain. Forensic teams had missed this on the first sweep. The new sample would change everything. The Hale stood still in the center of the room. His breath came shallow. The missing hours from the witness statements now pointed elsewhere, not to the stranger in the woods, but to someone who knew the cabin, someone who had stood here before. Ramirez lifted a small kit from his pocket. He scraped at the stain with careful strokes. The tool clicked once, then again. The results would take hours. Yet the color alone told a story. It matched the victim's type. It did not match the suspect's. Outside, a branch snapped. Both men froze. Hale's hand moved to his sidearm. The sound faded into silence. Nothing followed. only the wind through the gaps in the walls. They stepped back from the boards. The evidence had already rewritten the hunt. The trail no longer led to the border road. It curved back toward the station, toward the one man who had filed the original report. Ramirez met Hale's eyes across the dim space. Neither spoke the name aloud. Neither spoke. The cabin held its quiet. The floorboards kept their secret a moment longer. Then Hale turned. He walked out first. Ramirez sealed the sample in a fresh bag. The night pressed close again. The road waited beyond the trees. Every step now carried the weight of what the blood revealed. They reached the cruiser without another sound. Hale started the engine. The low rumble filled the space between them. Ramirez placed the sealed bag on the dash. Its contents would shift the entire case. No more conflicting accounts, only the truth the stains had waited to tell. The woods fell behind them. Headlights cut the dark road. Hale gripped the wheel tighter. The doubts that traveled with them had found their target. The hunt turned inward now, toward the station, toward the man who had hidden the first report. The blood demanded answers, and time had already begun to run short. The woods fell behind them. Headlights cut the dark road. Hale gripped the wheel tighter. The doubts that traveled with them had found their target. The hunt turned inward now, toward the station, toward the man who had hidden the first report. The blood demanded answers, and time had already begun to run short. Hale eased the car to a stop outside the old precinct building. Rain slicked the windows. He killed the engine and sat for a moment. The silence inside the vehicle pressed against his chest like a held breath. Beside him, his partner checked the revolver once more. No words passed between them, only the soft click of the cylinder sliding home. Hale nodded once. They stepped out into the damp night air. The station door creaked open under Hale's hand. Dim lights buzzed overhead. The place smelled of old paper and colder secrets. At the far desk sat the sergeant. His eyes lifted slowly. Recognition flickered across his face like a dying match. "You weren't supposed to come back here," the sergeant said. His voice carried the weight of something buried. Hale moved closer. Each step echoed against the empty walls. The report on the first body. Where did you bury it? The report on the first body. His fingers drummed once on the desk. His fingers drummed once more, then stopped. A shadow shifted in the doorway behind him. Someone else had been waiting. She stepped into the light. A woman Hale had never seen. Her coat was dark and her expression colder still. "The blood you chase belongs to more than one story," she said. Her words landed like stones dropped into deep water. Hale's hand drifted toward his sidearm. The partner tensed beside him. The woman smiled without warmth. "I kept his silence for years. Now the silence keeps me." The sergeant rose halfway from his chair. His face had gone pale. "She knows everything," he whispered. The admission hung in the air. Hale felt the ground shift beneath the case he had built. The woman moved forward. Her steps were measured. The first report was never missing. It was mine to protect, and the man you hunt, he was only the beginning. Tension thickened the room. Hale's doubts sharpened into something sharper still. An accomplice who had lived inside the silence all along. One who could tear the entire thread apart with a single name. The partner spoke at last. "What do you want?" The woman tilted her head. Rain tapped against the window glass like impatient fingers. "What I want the hunt to stop before it reaches the one who paid me to stay quiet." Hale studied her face. Lines of old fear crossed it. The sergeant looked away. His hands shook once before he stilled them. The narrative they had followed now bent under new weight. Outside, thunder rolled low across the hills. Inside, the four figures stood locked in the moment. The woman reached into her coat. She drew out a folded paper yellowed at the edges. "This changes who the guilty truly are." Lance took the paper. His eyes scanned the lines. Names appeared that had never surfaced before, connections that reached higher than the station walls. The accomplice watched him read. Her presence alone threatened to collapse everything they thought they understood. The sergeant sank back into his chair. Defeat settled over his shoulders. "She was there the night it started. I hid the report because she asked." His confession came out broken. Hale folded the paper again. He met the woman's gaze. No one moved. The air felt thinner now. Time pressed forward even as the room held its breath. She spoke once more. The blood will keep demanding, but some answers come with a price that unravels the rest. Her words lingered. Hale felt the case fracture along lines he could not yet see. The partner shifted his weight. The revolver stayed holstered. Outside, the rain grew heavier. Inside, the unexpected accomplice stood her ground. The night stretched long around them all. Hale turned toward the door. The paper burned in his pocket. The woman did not follow. She remained with the sergeant. Their shared silence had become its own kind of weapon. The road waited beyond the station lights. The Hale stepped into the rain. Each drop struck like a reminder. The hunt had changed shape. An accomplice had surfaced, and the narrative now trembled on the edge of breaking apart. The hunt had changed shape. An accomplice had surfaced, and the narrative now trembled on the edge of breaking apart. The road waited beyond the station lights. Hale drove through the rain toward the courthouse. The wipers scraped a steady rhythm against the glass. Each mile pulled him deeper into the weight of what waited. An accomplice had surfaced. The narrative trembled. He parked beneath the stone arches. Rain dripped from his coat as he climbed the steps. The air inside felt thicker than the storm outside. Officers stood at the doors. Reporters clustered in the lobby. No one spoke above a murmur. Officers stood at the doors opened with a low creak. Hale found his seat at the prosecution table. The judge entered last. All rose. All sat again, in perfect unison. The first witness took the stand. Silence stretched across the room. The bailiff swore the witness in. Then nothing moved. The prosecutor cleared his throat. "State your name for the record." The witness answered. His voice barely carried. Hale watched the defendant. The man sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the floor. An empty chair waited beside him. The accomplice slot. No one filled it yet. Testimony began. Details unfolded in fragments. Dates, times, locations that matched the evidence logs. Every answer landed like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples spread, then quiet returned. The defense objected once. The objection hung in the air. The judge ruled without raising his voice. Sustained. The word echoed. Then the room swallowed it whole. Hale felt the sergeant's earlier silence follow him here. It pressed against his ribs. They had shared that weapon. Now it belonged to the entire chamber. No one dared break it first. A second witness replaced the first. She folded her hands. Her gaze swept the gallery. She inhaled before speaking. The prosecutor guided her through the night in question. Her words came slow, each one measured against the hush. Opening these conjectures, each Tetley with a holy followed the wind. Eyewitness informed the prosecutor at some point he grasped a Nobi hide. He was luriding a challenge to mesh the sitting at all. The defense cross-examined next. Questions landed softly. The witness answered each one the same way. "I do not recall." The phrase repeated. It became its own rhythm, a drumbeat of refusal. Hale's notes blurred. He looked up. The jury watched the witness. Their faces showed nothing, yet the air between them crackled. Anticipation built like pressure behind glass. The judge called a recess. The gavel struck once. Sound died instantly. People rose without speaking. Footsteps padded across marble. Hale remained seated. He exhaled into the emptying room. When court resumed, the prosecutor called a new name, a detective from the early investigation. The man took the stand with measured steps. He placed his hand on the Bible. His oath rang clear. Then the questions began again. Evidence photos appeared on the screen. The room leaned forward as one. No one breathed. Hale studied the defendant's face for any flicker. Nothing showed. The man might have been carved from the same stone as the bench. Laneveller's name surfaced in testimony. It hung there. The prosecutor paused to let it settle. Jurors shifted. One wrote something down. The scratch of pen on paper sounded loud as thunder. Hale remembered the rain outside the station. He remembered the sergeant's steady presence. Their silence had prepared him for this. The courtroom demanded the same weapon now. He would not be the one to break it. Cross-examination dragged. The defense pressed for inconsistencies. The detective answered each time with the same calm. The record stands. The phrase landed and stayed. No one challenged it further. Afternoon light faded behind the windows. Lamps switched on above the bench. Shadows lengthened across the floor. The judge checked the clock. Proceedings would continue tomorrow. He dismissed the jury. Chairs scraped. Papers rustled. Yet the charged quiet lingered. Hale gathered his files slowly. The empty accomplice chair remained in place. It waited like an unanswered question. He stepped into the corridor. Reporters surged forward. Questions flew. Hale kept walking. The sergeant waited near the exit. Their eyes met. Nothing needed to be said. Outside, the rain had eased. The street lamps glowed through thinning mist. Hale paused at the top of the steps. The trial had only begun. The silences would grow heavier still. He descended into the night. Hale stepped into the damp night. The courthouse lights faded behind him. Morning would bring the next round. He walked without hurry. Rain traced faint lines on the pavement. Morning would bring the next day. Murmurs died as the judge entered. Hale took his seat at the defense table. The air felt thicker than before. Every eye waited. The air felt thicker than before. The prosecutor called the witness. A single name echoed through the room. A single name echoed through the room. The doors opened at the rear. Footsteps crossed the marble floor. The woman climbed to the stand. She placed her hand on the Bible. Her voice stayed low at first. Questions began. Routine facts rolled out one by one. The prosecutor paced in front of her. Hale watched the jury. Faces remained still. Faces remained still. Then the tone shifted. The next question landed harder. The next question landed harder. The prosecutor shifted before answering. She looked toward Hale. Her hands tightened on the rail. Words formed slowly. They were not the words anyone expected. The room changed in an instant. The room changed in an instant. The room cantering, silence pressed against the walls. The prosecutor straightened. He repeated the question. The witness did not flinch. She spoke again. Her voice carried further this time. Details spilled out without hesitation. The room crunched as felt the shift in the jury box. Shoulders leaned forward. Pens stopped moving across notebooks. The judge leaned closer to the bench. No one interrupted. The testimony built its own weight. The testimony built its own weight. The room spurred down sometimes. Outside the tall windows, the sky stayed gray. Inside, the tension pulled tighter. The witness continued. Each sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples reached every corner. Hale kept his expression even. The prosecutor tried to regain control. Objections rose and fell. The judge overruled most of them. The witness stayed steady. Her eyes never left the prosecutor now. The story she told refused to bend. Minutes stretched. The air grew heavier with every revelation. Hale noted the small changes around him. A juror shifted in her seat. Another glanced at the clock, then looked away. The bailiff stood straighter near the door. The testimony reached its final point. The witness drew a breath. She delivered the last line without flourish. The words settled and did not lift. The prosecutor stepped back. He had no follow-up ready. Cross-examination would come next. Hale rose. He approached the stand with measured steps. The witness met his gaze. The room waited again. Nothing moved except the faint sound of breathing. The trial had turned. The room had turned. Hale asked his first question. The answer came without pause. Another question followed. The same calm voice answered. Each exchange tightened the atmosphere further. The earlier ease in the room had vanished. The earlier ease in the room had vanished. One day, when Hale finished, he returned to his table. The prosecutor stood once more. Redirect brought only repetition. The witness held her ground. The judge finally called a recess. Gavel struck wood. Still no one spoke above a whisper. People filed out slowly. Hale remained seated. The witness stepped down. Their eyes met for a moment. Nothing needed to be said. The damage was already done. He gathered his notes and rose. The corridor outside waited. Footsteps echoed against stone. The day was not over. Hale walked the corridor alone. Stone walls pressed close. The echo of his own steps followed him like a shadow that refused to fade. The echo night settled without mercy. He sat in the dim room with only a single lamp burning low. Papers lay scattered across the table. Each line stared back at him. The witness testimony replayed in his mind, words that cut deeper than any blade. Wordless stat hours stretched. Hale stood and paced. He stopped at the window. Darkness outside offered no answers. Everything had led to this moment. The trial had stripped away every defense. The trial had stripped away every defense. The crust testimony, he returned to the chair. Memories surfaced unbidden. The first day in court. The accusations that hung in the air like smoke. Faces in the gallery had watched with cold judgment. Hale exhaled sharply. The waiting room. Dawn crept closer. He knew the verdict would arrive with the light. No more delays. No more arguments. The final words waited at the courthouse steps. Hale closed his eyes. Reflection brought no comfort. Only the raw truth of choices made. He recalled the witness on the stand, the moment their eyes met across the room. Nothing had been said aloud then, yet the silence had spoken volumes. Damage already done. Hale gathered his thoughts now as he had gathered his notes before. The lamp flickered. Hoorie reached to steady it. Fingers trembled once, then stilled. Outside, a distant clock tower marked the passing time. Each chime landed heavy. Hale listened. Sleep never came. He walked the room again. Floorboards creaked under his weight. Each step carried the burden of the night before. The case had consumed months. Lives hung in balance, his own included. Dawn broke at last. Pale light filtered through the curtains. Hale stood ready. The verdict waited. He opened the door and stepped into the morning chill. Footsteps on pavement echoed once more. The courthouse loomed ahead. Onside the chamber, the air felt thick. People gathered in silence. Hale took his place. The judge entered. All eyes turned. The moment stretched. The ruling came clear and final. Words fell like stones into still water. Hale absorbed each one. No reaction showed on his face. No rest seed Amy's. Yet inside conflict raged. The night of waiting had prepared him. Reflection had sharpened the edge. He rose when required. The room emptied slowly once more. This time the weight felt different. He remained seated for a breath longer, then stood. The corridor outside called again. Note: Hale walked forward. The judgment settled into his bones. No turning back. The day had begun. Hale walked forward. The judgment settled into his bones. No turning back. The day had begun. The corridor stretched ahead like an accusation. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Each step carried the verdict deeper. He passed closed doors. Behind them, voices murmured in low tones. Survivors waited in clusters. Their eyes followed him without mercy. The paper felt heavier than it should. Every page held a name that refused to fade. Hale exhaled. The air tasted of old coffee and regret. Across the city, a woman named Lena sat alone in her kitchen. Sunlight cut through the blinds in thin bars. She traced the edge of a photograph. The child in the image smiled forever. Her fingers trembled once, then stilled. The silence pressed against her ribs. She had testified 3 days earlier. The words had left her mouth like stones. Now they returned at night. She whispered the names aloud. "They are gone." The room offered no reply. Hale reached the stairwell. 2 investigators stood waiting. Their faces showed the same hollow lines. One nodded. The other looked away. They had closed the case, yet nothing felt closed. The evidence pointed to finality. The law demanded it. Still, the echoes lingered in every room they entered. Lena rose from the table. She moved to the window. Outside, children played on the sidewalk. Their laughter reached her like a distant bell. She placed both hands on the glass. The cold seeped into her palms. The corridor stretched ahead like an accusation. where knock sounded at her door. She did not answer at once. The knock came again. Hale stood on the threshold when she finally opened it. He held his badge loosely. The metal caught the light. "Need a moment of your time." His voice stayed low. Lena studied him. She saw the same exhaustion in his eyes. They sat at the kitchen table. The photograph remained between them. Hale spoke of the remaining threads, a single witness still unaccounted for, a detail that refused to settle. Lena listened without interruption. "The corridor, some weights never lift." She said it simply. Hale nodded once. The admission settled between them like shared breath. The time, back at headquarters, the team gathered in the briefing room. Maps covered the walls. Red strings connected points long since visited. One detective traced a line with his finger. The motion slowed. Another poured cold coffee down the sink. No one spoke of victory. No one spoke of victory. Hale stood at the head of the table. He opened the final file. Pages whispered as they turned. Each name received its moment. The room held its silence. Lena remained at her window long after Hale left. The photograph stayed on the table. She did not return to it. Instead, she watched the light shift across the floor. Shadows lengthened. The day continued its slow retreat. No one, investigators dispersed one by one. Their footsteps faded down the hall. Hale stayed last. He gathered the maps. The red strings tangled briefly in his hands. He smoothed them flat again. Outside the courthouse steps, a small group of survivors stood together. They did not speak. Their presence alone formed a quiet line. Hale passed them on his way to the car. Each eyes met. No words exchanged. The understanding passed without sound. Only night arrived without announcement. Lena turned on a single lamp. The light pooled around the photograph. She sat once more. Her hands rested on the wood. The weight remained. It always would. It always would. Thus, Hale drove through empty streets. Streetlights flickered overhead. The radio stayed off. He thought of the cases that closed and the ones that refused. The road stretched forward. He kept both hands on the wheel. In the quiet of her kitchen, Lena closed her eyes. The echoes softened but did not vanish. She accepted their presence. The same. The room held her as it had for months. A worm still waiting. Hale reached his apartment building. He parked. The engine ticked as it cooled. He remained seated for one long breath, then stepped out. The door closed with a solid sound. Lena continued around them. Survivors carried what could not be left behind. Investigators moved through the residue of facts. The weight settled deeper into every bone. It offered no release, only